Awesome. Hey everyone, my name's Sam. I'm the Director of Member Experience here at Advent Co-working. Welcome to our Advent Member Talk today here with Travis. So Advent Member Talks is a weekly event that we put on each week featuring a different member on the topic of their choosing. So just a really great way to learn from our members, to still share, to promote folks on our socials, and just kind of help build community and bring everyone together. So excited that you're all able to join us today. And I'm going to hand it over to Travis, who is presenting on something very, very important about how work is killing us. So Travis.
All right. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to all of you for showing up. And thanks again, Sam, because, and I do mean this, your feedback that the topic was really interesting meant a lot to me. You might say that to everybody who shares, but if so, I don't care or need to know because I'm all into placebo these days. So if it works, it works. I was laughing today, actually thinking about who might or might not show up with the talk, which admittedly, I'm well aware is not like the most exciting, kind of insightful title. Who wants to show up to a talk about responsibility at the end of the day? But hopefully my description about work killing us, not just individually, but socially, and the effects that it has on its planet does mean something to you. I'm sure it connects with you all in some ways, especially coming not even out of a pandemic, still kind of living with that and lots of other things going on in the world. I'm not like an expert on most things responsibility in life in general, to be honest with you. I'm grew up lifelong troublemaker, consistent procrastinator, et cetera, et cetera. But I am really passionate about this question that I'll probably say multiple times throughout our short time together is, have we created a world of work responsible or responsive to all of who we are as human beings? And so just to let you in on my hidden agenda. This is a concept that I hope to do more and more work with in the future. So another reason I was excited about the opportunity to share it with you all. In many ways, you're the first group that I've been able to share some of these ideas that I've been wrestling with. And so I want to, maybe if somebody can volunteer to maybe give me a 5-minute warning or something. I might even end a little sooner than that, because I'd love if you have any responses, questions, feedback, challenges even, I'd love to hear them. But my hidden agenda is really boring title, socially responsible work, which maybe even I hope to give to you all as a gift, and maybe you can use it in your own work. But my own ambitions are that this could, become, policy at some point, or play a role in some really big shifts that I think we desperately need in our lives as people and the planet. I hope to make some of those, connections today. So big, boring Trojan horse, socially responsible work that I hope lots of creative, passionate, even radical people can do some exciting stuff with. That's my hidden agenda that is no longer hidden because we're recording this for anybody who's watching. And so what does it mean to be responsible to who we are? And I'm really thinking about who we are as human beings. There's lots of paradigms I'm interested in that explore what it means to be a human being. You all are probably well aware, evolutionary biologists make a distinction among other primates that we are Homo sapiens, right? Sapiens comes from an old Latin root that means the wise ones. And if you look around, we don't really live up to that kind of idealistic standard as the wise ones, but as sapiens, supposedly we are conscious and can think about our thinking, right? We are myth makers and storytellers. We have memories and experiences. And a lot of that is true, but also now that paradigm has been challenged because we know lots of living things and animals are conscious and have experiences and even tell stories and dance and sing and make songs and all that stuff. Another paradigm I think is really interesting is, again, a Latin phrase, homo faber. Faber meaning something like makers or creators, right? Or workers. And so a lot of the philosophers that do work around homo faber point to what makes us human is that we are tool makers, right? And that we obviously create technologies that make our lives interesting in all kinds of ways. And of course that, relates to work as well. But one of my personal favorites, some more Latin for you, if you're not like sprinkling a little Latin in your talks, I would encourage you to do so. Like, tease it up a notch. People think you're like really smart. Just like Salt Bay, sprinkle a little Latin on your talks. Homo Ludens, one of my favorite books. It's kind of a classic in philosophy, where the author, Wazinga, he makes this case that we're actually not inherently workers and makers and tool creators. And, we're not distinguished by kind of how smart we are as thinkers, as sapiens. But if you look all throughout human history, especially the millions of years that we know from the archaeological record, human beings worked pretty little throughout the day, right? Just enough to be kind of hunters, gatherers, foragers, and survivors. And the interesting stuff is what we did in our free time, which could be characterized as play, sitting around fires and telling stories and creating art and making things together, right? Passing on traditions and myths and creating religions and all these interesting things. And we are all of those things. But I am increasingly putting myself in the camp of scholars and researchers and philosophers that use this language of we are not just human beings, single things, right? But we are human becomings, that we are down to our cellular level every single day. We are consuming energy and expending energy, right? We're losing cells and we're gaining new cells. We're losing memories, some of us like myself more than others, and gaining new memories, right? We're losing identities and creating new identities. We're, remembering old stories and creating new stories. We are constantly evolving and transforming and becoming new things all the time. I'm a new dad, so I've had like a front row seat to this like human becoming process. Another thing that distinguishes Homo sapiens, human beings, from other living things is that we have one of the longest periods of maturation, right? Of becoming. I say I'm a new dad. She's like 2.5 now, but I'm gonna use the new dad thing as long as I can like ride it out until I'm like regular schmegular dad. But I won't tell you all the things that I'm fascinated by watching my daughter grow up, but one of the things was walking, and it just stood out to me. I'll never forget it. Walking is one of those other things that distinguishes us from other living things. Think about it. There's not, a lot of people make the case that there's not any other bipedal animals like us. So we're kind of unique in that way. And the way that we learn to walk is fascinating. So my daughter, she had to learn to move in the world, right? And she didn't do it by kind of waking up every day and clocking in on her 9 to 5, like getting her coffee and just like running laps around the house until she got it. There was a playful element to it. And there's some really interesting research where they've hooked up toddlers to like GPS tracking devices, and you can see their traces if you follow them around a room. The average toddler falls like 17 times an hour. They walk close to 15 miles a day if you track them. They are literally kind of these balls of energy that are just driven to move, which is pretty fascinating. And so I told you about Homo faber, the makers, the workers, Homo ludens, the players, Homo sapiens, the thinkers. We are all of those things kind of bundled up together, right? Now, the reason I wanted to start kind of offering you that of how complex we are, how amazing kind of we are, is because I think we lose that, and we especially lose it when it comes to our relationship to work, which dominates so much of our lives. And it has for a really long time. And so I told you I'd repeat this question several times as we go. Have we created a world of work that lives up to, that is responsible to all of that? I guess that could be kind of rhetorical. In some ways, the answer is obviously no. I mean, if you found that like that kind of work that taps into your making abilities, your playing abilities, your thinking abilities in some kind of ideal way, let me know if you're hiring. If you look at the data, which is pretty overwhelming, the answer is it's really complicated, right? So one way we might like think about that answer is job satisfaction surveys, which are notoriously hard because overwhelmingly the majority of people are not satisfied with their current work. But it's not everyone, and satisfaction is kind of a low bar when you think about all that we're capable of doing and thinking and being in the world. There's some really compelling research. The first line of the title of this talk, that work is killing us in some very tragic ways. I'm going to be referencing lots of books to you today. So there's a book that will probably become my Bible as I kind of share this work more and more with folks. It's called Dying for a Paycheck. It was written by a Stanford business scholar. His name's Jeffrey Pfeiffer, and he's got all kinds of data, some pretty complicated mathematical models measuring how work is killing us in lots of ways. He estimates that there are about 120,000 unnecessary deaths that are directly caused by workplace stress. And he makes all kinds of other correlations between all kinds of addictions, obesity, suicide rates, anxiety. And so work is not responsible for lots and lots of people. He also makes the connection, and lots of other scholars do too, of the ways that work is literally burning up and destroying our planet in lots of ways. The social part of being socially responsible work is that we are intimately connected with each other, right? I mean, what happens at work does not stay at work. So your stress is my stress. Your anxiety is my anxiety. Your pollution is my pollution. And so if work is inherently this social phenomena, this activity that we do collectively as a society, it means that it's work that all of us have to do because we all have some stake in it, right? Let me shift gears a little bit because it is complicated, right? I mean, I know this is a co-working space with a lot of idealistic, creative, passionate people, and there are probably even some of you that, like me, might love your work some days, right? You might describe your work as something like a calling. Lots of religious and spiritual traditions have even thought about work and making as a part of like a spiritual kind of practice, right? So I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit of a story. I'm a speaker, trainer, facilitator by trade. So I usually show up with a PowerPoint. But part of my work story is that PowerPoint is killing me. So I brought some physical stuff today. I told Sam I was going to bring back show and tell. So that's we'll see how this goes. How many of you know the name Sisyphus? Does that ring any bells? Yeah, all right, couple hands maybe. I feel like you might get it in a trivia or something. So you're obviously not reading Greek mythology as bedtime stories. So I'll refresh your memory if you don't know. This was new for me. But a lot of people that write and think about work tell this Greek myth about this figure Sisyphus, who started out as a mortal like us, a human being, but he was a trickster figure, and he got his way out of death twice by tricking the gods. And so his punishment by the god Zeus was an eternal form of labor. So I brought in this 25-pound medicine ball, which I will not be holding very long. So his curse, the curse for Sisyphus for tricking the gods and trying to get out of his own death, trying to cheat death, was to roll up this really heavy rock up this hill. And as soon as he got up to the top of the hill, the large boulder would roll back down, and Sisyphus would have to go down the hill, pick up the rock again, roll it right up, and right when he got to the very top, the rock would roll back down. And that was his existence for all of eternity. And lots of philosophers have done a lot of writing and thinking about what this myth of Sisyphus can teach us, what it means. There's a famous existentialist philosopher, Albert Camus, who takes a different spin and says we should look and imagine Sisyphus as happy. Because most people interpret this similar to the curse of the Garden of Eden, right? That work will always be kind of, the point of it is toil and sweat and tears and thorns and blood, which is already kind of wherever this myth came from, which is, thousands of years old at this point. Somebody imagined that the perfect curse, right? The human-sized curse for people as kind of expansive as we are would be this very boring and monotonous and dreadful, exhausting work. But Camus says, well, maybe we should think about Sisyphus as happy because because life is essentially absurd, right? That we can't always control what our life might look like and the obstacles we might come up against. And so Sisyphus doesn't complain. He's a good worker, right? He lets the rock roll down, picks it up, pushes it up, and back and forth again. And there's these moments, he says, when the rock falls down that Sisyphus might be happy, or he's engaged, he's in flow, he's made the best of his work, right? I obviously have a different approach because, I started out just talking about how amazing we are as human beings in terms of our potential. And so I think there's a lesson there of how complicated our relationship to work is. And one of the things I'm drawn to about Sisyphus is that his curse, in some ways, was that this big, heavy boulder and this big hill was there before he got there. And I think about, and if you're like me and you care about things like justice and equity and freedom and human potential for all people, regardless of kind of your starting place in life, we all know that not all people get the same kinds of opportunities to do the same kinds of work. So that's part of my work story, actually. I embody lots of what I would call like positions of privilege in the world. So I am a straight, cisgendered, white, former Protestant background man in the world. And so if you're familiar with some of those terms, that gives me a lot of kind of access to opportunities and resources and privilege in the world. But I also grew up working class, which is notoriously hard to kind of draw lines around who's the working class and where does that start and stop. But a lot of people point to working class people being sons and daughters of people who didn't go to college, people who didn't have a lot of resources in the world, not a lot of wealth, not a lot of kind of opportunities to pass on to future generations, those kinds of things. But one thing that also marks out whether you're working class is the kinds of jobs, the kinds of boulders and the kinds of hills that are set up for you generation after generation of the kinds of things you might do with your life. There's another book I'd recommend to you written way back in the 70s in England called Learning to Labor. And as soon as I read that, so many kind of light bulbs went off in my mind because this scholar, he followed some working class young boys in school, and he wanted to figure out why is it that so many young working class young men reject and resist school culture. And so he followed them around, and what he found is almost exactly what we find when you go into the school system today. That young working class, really, children of all stripes, but young working class males in particular, ingest all of these stereotypes about what they can do with their lives and who they can be in the world. And that was true for me. And you usually see this happen around middle school age, when some of the social pressures, the cultural pressures, and when the remnants of all that kind of capital of having college-educated parents kicks in. And at least when I was coming up, and I grew up out in Union County, not far from here, a pretty like working class, blue collar place, I distinctly remember tracking, right? When in my mind, in the minds of my friends that I grew up with at a really young age, we even used the language of those are the smart kids, and we were the dumb kids. And like that book, Learning to Labor, we made jokes about ourselves as a way to kind of make sense of who we were in the world. And it wasn't a tragic thing, we embraced it. Right. So then my new identity was kind of class clown. So school was a place to make friends and laugh and cut up and get in trouble. It wasn't a place to think or to imagine what I might do, right, with my life. And I think about that too with my nephews, right, about the same age that I was when I started being kind of tracked to pick up these kinds of boulders and to push those up those kinds of hills, and these other kind of students would go to these kinds of hills with those kinds of boulders. And one of the tragedies that I hope to like hook people with when I think about the great responsibility we have when it comes to creating a world of like flourishing work lands on me when we ask young people, what do you want to be when you grow up? And if you've lived a little while, it's hard to like look at your children in the eyes, like I do with my nephew and my daughter, and have them imagine all the possibilities that are open to them. And then you've lived long enough to know that those possibilities are pretty narrow, right? And more narrow for some people than others. So I did want to, see how I'm doing on time. Okay, we'll speed it up. because I've got some other stuff here I wanted to share. I'll never forget. We'll kind of see if we get to all of my stuff today. But one memory that sticks out that I want to kind of share with you as we like get to hopefully a place with maybe some questions or thoughts. I was notoriously always in trouble. This is also why I do a lot of work with educators, feel really connected to young people coming up, is I empathize deeply with children that the world has really small views of, right? That curse of pushing boulders for their entire life in contrast with their potential as human beings should be unsettling for all of us, right? And so I'll never forget, and I grew up like old school, sorry, my parents did corporal punishment. I got spanked, I got grounded. They tried everything they could do, none of it worked. I was just incredibly energetic, hyper. I wanted to move. And in fact, biologically, we know, all of us, we have these circadian rhythms that we rest at night. And when we wake up, especially as young people, we are wired to move in the world. It's our foraging instincts, right? We have these seeker instincts in our brain that's wired in us. And then we send children, and all of us probably, to these incredibly sedentary workplaces. So my whole life, I vividly remember I hated school. I resisted it so much, being told to sit down, to shut up, to settle down, to quiet down, to get in line, to move over here, right? And one time I was grounded for a long time. It was like 2 weeks, which in my world was like an eternity. And I remember sitting down in my room and I was so bored, and I didn't have video games, I didn't have anything to do. And I had this old basketball in my room. And I don't know what like motivated this, but I picked up this basketball and I started like trying to practice to spin it on my finger. And I remember relentlessly, like hours a day, I did that over and over and over again until eventually, like I came out of my room after being grounded and I could spin the basketball. I can't do it now because like I'm like way over the hill, but like I could go between my legs, around my back, and my mom enrolled me in this like, I don't even know if they have this anymore, like this and one for kids, like basketball group. And like I was in heaven, right? So here was a kind of work, a task that was challenging and hard and creative and kind of fun. And so unlike school, I poured all of my kind of heart and mind and physical energy into this. It's probably a worthless thing. I don't know, it made a few of you like laugh, but I mean, you can't get paid for that, right? And so I wanted to share that with you to say, we should kind of never give up, not just on young people, but on each of us, that everybody has potential to learn, to grow, right? To try, to fall down, to do these incredibly like interesting things. And we have to resist narratives that we are just kind of robots, right? Or the robots might replace us, that we are wired and meant to do mundane, monotonous, drudgerous tasks, pushing these rocks up these hills. But I said our relationship with work is complicated, right? Because it's not so clear. So in fact, we do learn to love our work in many cases. And I don't know what the answer for that is. In fact, there's a new book that just came out that said, work won't love you back. And it's basically this clarion call to say, we need to really check our relationship with work. Because not all of us have the same kind of access, and it is an incredible privilege if you do a kind of work that you find some real deep meaning in, that you find useful, that you help other people in, but not everybody. In fact, the majority of the world does not, right? And you can kind of make the best of a bad situation and take your rock and maybe do something creative with it, but be careful with that relationship to your work, right? I wanted to maybe end, I've only got a couple of minutes because I still have some more stuff here. A lot of people think about Sisyphus and pushing up these boulders as kind of really drudgerous, exhaustive, manual labor kind of work. And I've done carpentry before, I've worked in restaurants, I've worked retail, I've worked a lot of really hard jobs. But the last 10 years of my life, I've been really privileged to work in some pretty major like corporations and to be in some pretty privileged, prestigious places. And the thing that's interesting about socially responsible work is that work is killing all of us, but in very different ways. I'm coming out of like a horrible bout with burnout. And I was doing some reading recently. There's another scholar I like, her name is Kelly Lambert, and she's a neuroscientist, and she's kind of a world's leading expert on rat studies. So there's a reason why we use rats to learn about human beings. They have some really interesting parallels to the way our minds work. And when I read her studies of putting rats in mazes that don't have a way out, what we might call burnout, and I'm kind of working on some definition of burnout, something like an accumulation of energy with no exit, right? So you wake up and you clock in, or if you're a student, you go to school and you've got all this natural instinct energy to move and to seek and to play and to figure out. And then your wheels, we even say our wheels are spinning, right? And there's no way out. And the rats that she studied, when she's put in mazes that don't have any interesting obstacles, they don't have any interesting challenges to figure out, they don't have any interesting surprises, or even like they have water slides, all kinds of like rat mazes stuff. The rats that are in monotonous, mundane, boring, dead-end mazes literally die, right? And it happens really slowly. They have burnout and depression and anxiety and stress. Similar to us, right? So even we see this in people with like high salaried, high certificate, prestigious professions, right? So this is kind of a clarion call, not just for people pushing boulders up hills, but for people trapped in mazes. And I know we do a lot of kind of talking, and we should, about, you know, the various struggles and oppressions and privileges that each of us have. And I think that's important. I also think it's important to talk about what we have in common, right? For solidarity. That we are all in this work, you know, situation together. We all have some responsibility to play, and we're not in it alone. So whether you feel like you're trapped in a maze, or you're pushing boulders, or the people around you that you see kind of work killing in different ways, you know, finding some way to tap into kind of your own particular relationship with work, both your struggle in it, and, you know, your hope for it. How are we on time now? 1 minute? Let's see if I can do it. The last thing I wanted to show you was juggling. Maybe I'll skip juggling. Okay, we'll juggle real quick. Look up, I only got a minute left. Look up some research on juggling. Psychologists have been studying juggling for years and years and years. It's a fascinating thing. One, because people think it's like really complicated. Anybody juggle in here? All right.
How many balls?
Yes, good question. So like 2 or 3, but the percentage of the population that juggles is almost nothing. And people are pretty intimidated by it, because when you think about it, there's no reason why human beings would ever juggle. This taps into our play nature. But it's actually a skill that you can learn in a pretty short amount of time, if you ever put some time into it. What's interesting about juggling is people study it because it actually is evidence that we can create new neural networks in our minds, right? Neuroplasticity, if you're into that yet. This gets back to where I started. We are human becomings, right? We have this potential to do like amazing things all the time. Oh, I should have practiced where I came. Okay, there we go. And so socially responsible work, spinning the basketball might be something like reform. What are the small ways that even on your teams and as leaders in your small places that you can create less toxic work cultures? But when I think about juggling, I'm thinking pretty big picture about, and I think we're ripe for it now coming after the pandemic, some ways we can make some really radical, revolutionary changes to the way that we do work. Not only is our own individual mental health at stake, but the life of our planet, which is for another talk as well. So thank you all. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. You did so good juggling.
Thanks.
You'll have to teach us all sometime. Well, thank you so much. And thanks again to everyone who joined us today. Advent Member Talks is the second Tuesday of each month. Next month, we're going to be joined by Candace Kelly with Innovate Charlotte, a really awesome nonprofit. She's going to be talking about the importance of social capital. So really continuing this idea of how we can all come together and build community and support each other through play and not die from work, which is so important because I appreciate all of you. So again, thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you.
I missed the beginning.
That's all right,
Sorry.
Travis.
Travis.